So I want to take us through this talk today to think about the relationship between technology and activism. And I'll start with there's two stories that have inspired my work in this area. As I mentioned, I have a personal interest in thinking about the way that people use technology, not simply to respond to mass oppression, but more to respond to issues that arise in the context of everyday life. So the first story starts with these two young guys. I teach at Emerson College, as I mentioned yesterday. Emerson is it's a small liberal arts institution in the middle of Boston. If you've been to Boston, there's the Boston Common, and then a series of buildings. And the college is famous for, or is very well known in the United States for film and art. And part of that is they have a strong approach to activism. So everything that's done at Emerson is research and theory applied to practice. That's the whole notion of the college. And that these two young men were different majors. They were both in their third year of studies at Emerson. And they were around in 2013. We had this Boston Marathon bombing by two brothers of Chechen background who had lived in Boston and had planned to come and set off two bombs at the end of the marathon. So if you look at this is the Back Bay where the bombings occurred, and on the corner up there of that park where the water is, that's where Emerson College is. So we were about 2 blocks from the end of from where the closest bomb went off. And I was really inspired by, this is obviously pictures of what happened. We had many of our students who were there in the crowd who were thinking about responding. When this happened, obviously, as I mentioned a little bit yesterday, there were a week where the city basically had been shut down, where media was trying to cover the story but didn't have a lot of access. One of the younger brother who was involved, who's now in prison awaiting trial, he had gone back to his university just south of Boston, and he was actually back taking classes, and the older brother was in hiding. And during this time, the city was kind of going back and forth in terms of figuring out where people could be safe, where they could go, and how to kind of respond to this treatment. The media had a hard time covering this. This is a picture of Reddit. So Reddit is the online news curation site. And there is actually some fairly significant damage done to young American Muslims who had been identified on social media as potential suspects, and they had been pointed out. So this is a little bit of a farce, but it showed it was a good metaphor for looking at how social media actually impacts the way the stories are covered and told. So there was a lot of kind of rumor and hearsay happening. But at the same time, what I was really interested in is there was a whole strong community of people that were popping up for support and for help and to reach out. So here's this is a Google form or a Google public page that was put up where people were offering their homes and bedrooms to runners that were stuck on the racetrack, or people that couldn't get home to their homes. This is a picture of Boston Strong t-shirts, and this is where the Emerson thing comes in. So those two students who you saw there were both near the finish line of the marathon when the bombs went off. And when they got back to their dorm, they were thinking about how they could artfully respond, how they could help what happened there. It impacted them very closely. And what they did was they had decided that they wanted to help raise money for the victims immediately after the race. So they had a simple design, which was to make a t-shirt that said Boston Strong, and to sell this t-shirt, there it is, and raise $1 million for the fund to support the families. Over time, with the design of this t-shirt, but also really strong use of media and social networks and blogs and video, they actually, there's two of them with their friend who helped with their campaign. They raised about $900,000 in support of the victims of the Boston Marathon bombing. And what I was really interested in was, this story really spoke to me, not only because they were active in their response and they created a meaningful campaign that raised a significant amount of money. But at the same time, I was interested in how they chose to express and to share this story. What were the media strategies? What were the technologies? What were the ways that they engaged? How did they reach communities of people who wanted to help? They weren't from a big organization. They weren't from a government. They weren't from this Boston City Council. They were just two individuals, students at our college, that ended up running a campaign that raised more money in a shorter amount of time than any other campaign did. So I was really struck by the way that they went about this. How could they use digital technologies and civic technologies to raise $1 million in that quick a time, right? This is normally behavior that's reserved for large institutions, government, and public bodies. And now we're seeing this type of civic response and civic activism, mostly all raised in the digital space, happening by young citizens with no affiliation or connection to this. So this really drove me to think about the way that we use tools and technologies to engage in civic life. The other story that I want to share with you, is this. Do you guys know what this is? This is BP, right? Everyone knows who BP is. It's a large, they're a large oil company. They do much more than that, but they're British Petroleum. And they were, it was their oil rig in a few years back, I think now 5 years ago, I think, or maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that exploded and caused that large oil spill in the Gulf. So BP had a wonderful marketing strategy. After that happened, they took this logo. So this had been their logo for quite a while. It's a strong shield. It represents strength. It represents power. And after the oil spill, they changed their logo to this. And you see what this is, right? So they changed their logo from the shield, the defense, into a beautiful green flower to promote things like sustainability and the environment. And so this was a very intentional redesign of their logo. And so this, obviously, in their eyes, was an attempt to shift the narrative away from, we are a strong petroleum oil company, into we care about the environment after we've spilled, after we've caused the largest oil spill that we've seen, that we've ever seen before. And so I was curious about how this would work in a pre-digital age. Is that they would do this, there might be some backlash, but eventually this would become their logo. So there was a great thing that happened online, and it's another story that really inspired me, that local artists and graphic designers actually they saw this, and instead of sitting back and doing nothing, they took it in their own hand to fight back against this something called greenwashing that BP was doing, which is basically just changing their logo, supporting something that they never cared about, specifically to respond to a crisis. And this is what some artists did. They actually took the BP logo and they started to recreate it in the eyes of calling out or calling out BP and pushing back on BP to say, actually you can't do that and get away with it. Even though you're large, even though you're a big corporation. Eventually, they picked up on this to the point where Greenpeace actually took over the hosting of this and worked with concerned citizens, and they hosted kind of a crowd-funded contest for how should we really redesign BP's logo. So BP became Be Prepared up there with the gas mask and their flower in the middle, oil dripping on the dead flower here, Bayou Poison, so Bayou is the area down in the southern Gulf where Louisiana, Bayou is the landmass, and then here the flower that's sprinkled with kind of the black oil. And this actually continued. It became almost a show of public art. There is the gas where people put gas in their car turned into a gun, the footprint, the dying birds, and then the bicycle using the flower. So this happened to such a large extent, hundreds of logos, that it became a really strong civic act. BP had to respond. BP had to get rid of their greenwashing campaign. And it was all because of citizens who actually used technologies, but not only technologies, they leaned on each other's to actually create a whole community of response to this. And eventually, they forced BP to retract some of the new statements they had been putting out. So these two stories on a very personal level started to get me thinking about the role of technologies in response to to issues that affect us on a daily scale. So not only issues that are, we hear about these things in the media, they normally cover, we've heard about them all, large-scale civic protests, mass organizations of people in physical spaces. And I was really interested in, the media covers that, but what about the way technologies we can use technologies for activism that influence us on a daily basis. So this started my story, or my last year or two of work into looking at this everyday civic activism, or digital civic activism. So the way that we use technologies to engage in activism every day. Here's a quote that also kind of, that will frame our talk today and what I'd like to do. It says, "Our future holds in store the promise of an increased connectivity to a powerful social internet, which truly extends to every little spot on our planet Earth. We're all affected by and defined by each other's actions. What are you doing?" So this is a quote in 2007 by one of the founders of Twitter. And I want to problematize this. Obviously, I don't think our internet and connectivity extends to every corner of the world. And I think there's a lot of problems with that assumption. But I do think what's important about this question is that these technologies open up the potential for us to ask ourselves, what are you doing? And what are you doing in a digital age doesn't simply mean you have to be a political protester or you need to be out in the streets. But it actually means that with these technologies that we have access to communities and audiences that are diverse and far-reaching. What are we doing in the context of our technology use to advocate for things we believe in, to help contribute to causes that we care about, to make our local communities better? And so this question actually flipped the script from what are they doing to what are you doing? So Moses, at the end of Moses' talk, he kind of laid out this, a very realistic picture of the potential consequences of a big data age. And in the end, someone asked Moses, what should we do? There's a lot of this, what should we do? And at this point, there are some things that we know, but there's a lot that we don't know. But the question to me should be that what are we doing, not what should they not be doing. And it shouldn't be how we can protect ourselves, that's the first part of it. But the second part is how can we work within these technologies to either create demand for more privacy or create demand for more transparency. And so this is what's been driving my work in this space. And for me, what I want to do today is I'm going to tell you a bunch of stories of civic activism, lay some frameworks, and then we'll revisit those stories to show just how these points of civic activism were actually built and maintained. So what this is not about, I want to create a clear divide here. These tools are facilitators, but they're merely facilitators. I want to think about digital civic activism not as a technological phenomenon, I want to think about it as a human phenomenon, that we are simply using new tools because they exist. Before the digital age, when we wanted to advocate, we used tools that we could advocate for. We wrote letters to the press, we tried to get on TV, we went to physical spaces to protest. These are things we did with the tools available. We now have new tools available. These tools, as we mentioned yesterday, are not, they will not define or dictate any form of activism. And I think a lot of times we hear things like Twitter revolution or Facebook revolution. To me, those terms are a bit meaningless because Facebook is not causing a revolution. Twitter is not causing a revolution. They're simply helping to facilitate and organize. So we should be very careful for how we think about these tools. There's a great book called Smarter Than You Think, where Clive Thompson actually tries to demystify this, and he writes, at best, today's digital tools help us see more, retain more, communicate more, and at worst, they leave us prey to the manipulation of the tool makers. So this again is the conflict that Moses is talking about, that if we don't learn how to use and misuse these tools, and I stress misuse, Facebook wants us to use their tools in a certain way. We can find ways to misuse them. Then we're simply left to the prey of the tool makers themselves. I stole something from Moses that he stole from me, that 1 minute on the internet. We normally just look at each other's work and then steal things. It's a pretty common act between us. So I just put this on instead of that thing again, so Moses wouldn't steal this from me. I just added it. This is about the ubiquity of technology. So we know this, and the question to me is not that because there's dangers and risks. I'm far more interested in the application of these tools to do interesting things than I am at looking at structural risks and dangers, because those have always been there. When TV first came around, there were a million studies on violence in TV and how it could create a more violent society. And the difference wasn't, the difference was how to watch smarter TV. The issue for me was, well, TV exists, so we have to either refine or reform the way TV is, or found a way to go around that violence on TV, or accept it. And the same with these digital technologies. We know they're ubiquitous. I don't think they're going away anytime soon. So I bring back what Ethan Zuckerman wrote in Rewire, which is that it's our responsibility for shaping the tools we want to use to encounter the world. And what I want to do in this next part of the lecture is try to show us how people are taking responsibility for shaping tools that they're using to encounter the world, and how this can create meaningful civic action. I've been thinking a lot about this in my next space of research. And trying to figure out what are the resources that people use, how do they use them, what are the ways they approach them. I don't think it's magic that these two students from Boston all of a sudden created this $1 million civic response to help those in need. I don't think they had any advantage or any secret connection. I really think there was, some of it of course was timing and luck, but I really think they had a certain set of resources, human, practical, and technological, that they employed to solve a problem that they wanted to solve. I think it's something that we all might be able to do at a different level, and I think it's unpacking that that's really important. Okay, so this frame now, for this frame now, I'm going to ask us, I'm going to try to unpack this a little bit. What does civic activism look like in digital culture? And I'm going to start with a map. And this is a really, this is a great visualization. This is actually a cool way you can use data. This was made by a graduate student at Penn State University. And let me just go back to the beginning. Hold on one sec. I'll refresh this. Okay. Where are we? Okay. So this is every protest starting in 1979. Let me see if this can get on. Okay, here we go. So I want to watch this. Oops, one second. Okay. So this is great. This is a mapping, and this is where I want to kind of start the case that civic activism is actually on the rise, and technology has something to do with this. This started in 1979. And a graduate student at Penn State did a visualization that took every reported case of civic action. So a civic protest, anytime that there was a story covered where citizens were responding to something in the world. And he did it from 1979 to, I think it was 2014 it ends at. And so when you see the dots, you see Brazil is quite quiet in these days, and so is Latin America, but you can see the frequency of protests increasing in time. I'll pull out here. We'll leave it and let it go a little bit. So what you see here, and I don't think this is, I think you can either argue that we are having a more violent world, and that might be one case of argument here. Another case of argument that you might make is that news and media are starting to report more on civic unrest. But the third argument, which I think is most compelling, is that I think right around the time of digital technologies and social tools, you see a large spike in reported cases of civic unrest. And so one interpretation of this, and doing more research on it, is that once people had the tool to have voices, they started using those tools more and more. So now you see in 2004, 2005, 2006, this is when social networks became ubiquitous and mass appropriated, when they became open to all users. And look what happens in 2008, 2009, when even more networks, when mobile phones at this point, the smartphone at this point, became the default thing, not simply that flip phone that you can't get online with. And look what happens in 2011, 2012. You could argue it's a worse world. I would argue that these tools and technologies that are in our pockets have become a stronger voice for us. And now look what happens in 1979. I don't think the world was at more peace in 1979. I might argue that we had less of a way to actively express what we care about or feel about. So if you see this reset, to me, it creates a compelling argument for how we might think about this. So how we see civic action. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of times we see it like this. This is how the media tells our stories. We think about Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, the Umbrella Revolution, this is Tahrir Square. We think about the media covering things where it's extreme. There's a lot of people, it's embedded in something large, big protests. They normally have to be physical. People have to go out on the streets, and then Facebook becomes a way to document these, or social media does. There's the Brexit issue which just happened. Here's protests in Greece, the country where my family comes from, and there is Ukraine. And so here we see, these are the narratives when we think about contemporary protest, right? And then we ask ourselves, what's the role of technology in this? Well, technology in this sense becomes an organizer, they become a facilitator, and they become an amplifier. So they allow people who aren't physically there to engage and embrace this in some meaningful way, right? They actually create an amplification of sound. But these things happen, I would say, in response to large civic or mass oppression. So issues where people have felt so repressed or oppressed that they physically take action. There's another level of civic activism that I want to talk about, and sometimes we get critiqued this way. Here's the other way we think about technology's role in civic activism, right? We think about someone in need of help, and then everyone with their hashtags. Do something, blame Bush, stand with her, united for her, and then ban knives. That we see all this rhetoric happening, but it's not changing anything, right? So we see this disconnect between physical protest and then what happens online. Or something like this, click here to save the world. That we can actually do this. So I think there's somewhat of a dichotomy here, to me, between the way we understand protests on large scale and the way we see technology either amplifying them or not causing them. I want to complicate this dichotomy a little bit, and I want to think about the reality of this being somewhere in between. So I'm going to tell you about 5 stories of digital civic activism, and I won't reveal how they use media or how the activism happened. I want to provide these stories, then we'll look at some of the theories that are supporting these and research, and then we're going to come back and unveil these to show how they actually did them and what might cause that. So here's the story of this is a 9-year-old. I don't know if anyone's heard of this story. No, right? So she's Scottish, and her name is Martha Payne. And at 9 years old, this is a picture of I don't know how school lunches are in Beirut, or even in my town in Boston. This is a picture of what their school lunches look like. They look quite appetizing, especially that one on the bottom right. She, at 9-year-old, is so upset with her school lunches that she started a blog, and she started to document these school lunches. And she started an online space for this. And she started posting so many pictures that the actual local Scottish government sent her a legal letter to shut down her website, because they were saying that this is a privacy issue. Moses will know about this. I didn't copy this story from him. I actually found this one myself. He'll use this in his next lecture. You watch what happens. The Scottish government actually sent a legal note for her to shut this down because it was an invasion of privacy. Like you can't take public pictures of what happens in schools there. And this caused a massive response. And I'm going to reveal the details later, but the long and short of it, if we think about it, she posted pictures for some years. And once the Scottish government tried to shut her down, she gained millions of followers, and she gained larger attention because the story grew legs. She ended up raising over $1 million. They like this. They really like this. I'm telling you. They're pro-to. This is civic action right here. I don't know what they are. Oh, it's great. It's wonderful. We have so many children on the campus. There's lunch in here. So she ended up having millions of followers, telling her stories, sharing them in more and more ways, and she raised over £1 million in Scotland that was put towards reforming school lunches, and then also went into Malawi and reformed a few of their school health initiatives. And she did this all by herself at 9 years old, just starting to document and write and share. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the media strategy later, but this is a wonderful example of using your voice, your expression, and digital or civic media to engage and embrace in a cause that's not a large-scale oppression, but something that's bothering us. So in past days, before this kind of digital technology age, we would ask ourselves, well, how do we respond to this? Do we tell our parents, sure, I don't like the school lunches? Do we ask the principal? Do we go to the people who are serving the lunches and tell them to make them better? I think there's different ways we do it. In this age, she went in public and started documenting and telling the story. We talked yesterday a lot about the power of the story and the human connection to the story. She was a human face of a student. She documented her experience here, and she scaled it to a level of reform on a national reform as part of the health structure in Scotland of their school lunches. We'll come back to this, but it's compelling. Here's another story. This is a 22-year-old woman named Molly Catchpole. She is, I've actually been interviewing her extensively for my next book. In 2008, she was a recent graduate of a small private college in the United States. She was living in Washington, D.C. And when we had our economic collapse, in response, Bank of America, here, they instituted an arbitrary monthly fee hike in their, for all of their card members who were Bank of America members. And they did this as part of a response to all the money they were losing, even though they ended up getting one of the largest bailouts by taxpayers in the entire country. She was a Bank of America cardholder. She was living paycheck to paycheck, and she was not happy, like many other people, in yelling about this arbitrary fee hike. Most of the times, again, the response would be anger and yelling and possibly changing your card. Well, she took to social media. It started with, that didn't come. Sorry. She started with a letter that she wrote to the president of Bank of America, and then she used her social network. She used change.org and a few other sites to build a considerable movement around the redaction of this fee and calling out Bank of America for preying on its citizens in a time of such a recession. And when she sent this out, she had a whole strategy, just her in her room, but she had an integrated strategy for how to reform this. She got about 400,000 people to share her letter and to print that letter out and send it to Bank of America. The mass media then picked up her story. She was very savvy with the mass media. Within 1 month of her writing that letter and spreading it, Bank of America announced to the nation on the biggest news channels that they were redacting this fee. And they mentioned her story as the reason why. So again, this is the notion of scaling local civic activism using technologies. And later on in this talk, we'll get back to how she did it. I just want to set the stage first, and then we'll go back. Okay, this is Lazem. You guys, do you know? You know that Lazem. Sorry, excuse me. I'm practicing. So this was started by a few young students at, I think at AUB, and one of them came to our Salzburg program, Selma Zaki, and their whole goal was to promote kind of community involvement, to embrace inclusion here, and to use art and performance to kind of to build out community issues. So here is them using public art. Here is them fundraising to recreate apartment buildings for migrants or refugees and long-term workers in Beirut. And here is them using fashion to think about diversity and intercultural change. And this was started by a couple of students here. They end up raising money. They've done a lot of work, and I know Selma is here and she's thinking about next steps for where this project will go. But again, starting with a small group of committed students here in an urban space in Beirut, thinking about how they can use art and technology to expand community inclusion issues around the country of Lebanon. This is something called Pimp My Caroka. Have you guys heard about Pimp My Caroka? Okay, so this is, again, I'll do it quickly, but this This is started by, there is these, caroka are these are kind of recycling buckets, and they're pulled by, they call them catadores, and they are Brazilian recyclers. But they're known as the invisible, because in the town, they actually do about 90% of the recycling for Brazil. They get paid nothing, they pull these carts, and they're called invisible because no one acknowledges them or recognizes them, except they're doing more to help the sustainability of the country than most anyone else is. And they get small wages when they turn in their piles of plastic and cardboard recyclables that they pick out of the trash all over cities like Rio and Sao Paulo. They have never been acknowledged. They have never been given benefits. They're treated basically as the lowest form of wage workers. And one street artist was interested, street artist and activist, and he was interested in helping the catadores be recognized for their work, or actually make them visible to the world. So it's very easy for us to not address what we can't see, and it's very easy for us to ignore what we can't see. And he thought the best way to do this would be to paint their carokas in vibrant street art, so that when they were going down the street and when they were moving side to side, you couldn't ignore them. You could not miss them. And he spent about 5 years doing this. When they got all over the street, people started taking pictures and sharing them. They created a huge integrated movement, and then it became the largest crowd-funded campaign in Brazil, which raised millions of dollars to support them in their work. And they ended up painting thousands of these of the carokas, and now they have a union, and they're working, and their wages are increasing, and they're actually bettering someone's life simply by the idea of painting and then using technologies to share. So again, this is scaling from a small scale to a large scale. Idle No More is the same, this is in Canada, and Idle No More is a movement started by 4 women, Indigenous women against the Canadian government, who was trying to reform laws against the Indigenous people of Canada. And they started with all online protest and online activism, gathering people who cared, getting petitions, using technologies to support their stories and to support their human stories that are connected to Indigenous and Native people. And they ended up moving it from online to offline at the scale of tens of thousands of people. And now with Canada's next elections, they have a major role in this issue of reform and representation of Indigenous people. So this was started in 2012, and it's still going very strong. And lastly, I'll tell you, well, there's 2 more that I'll quickly tell you about. This one is Marshall Reed, and he was 12 and he was in North Carolina, and he was being bullied extensively in his public schools for being overweight, and he didn't know how to eat healthy in these schools because the schools were giving really bad food options. He didn't understand what portion size meant. His parents had traveled a lot. So he basically, in a response to him not feeling like he wanted to live, worked with his mother to start documenting his struggles with food and with health. He created over 90 YouTube videos, and I'll show you one of them later, that are documenting how he's cooking, what he knows, and what he doesn't know. And just by sharing and repurposing these and spreading them, he ended up writing a book called Portion Size Me. He ended up going on national speaking tours, got 2 million viewers on YouTube, and raised a ton of money to donate to cyberbullying and online bullying and healthy causes in his state of North Carolina. And he did this all through the documentation and use of technology for this. And lastly, this is a little rural community outside of Mexico City, and I'll show you a clip on this later. And this is one of the most violent and drug-infused small community mothers. Do you know what they don't? Do you remember what they call? That's what they're called. Colonia. The translators translate from Spanish to Arabic to English. Colonia.
Yeah, they don't have running water.
Right, Colonia. So they're small kind of, and they had put in so much money through the government and through policing. This is to respond to these issues of violence and drugs, and nothing worked. They were getting zero impact. So then what they did was there's actually a crew called they're called the German crew, but they're a local Mexican street artists. And they proposed repainting the entire Colonia into a rainbow and to putting young people at work to paint this entire small community, to physically paint it in colors. And I'll show you about how they did that and what the effects of that were after it was completed. But another way, they used local art, they documented it, they shared it out to the whole neighborhood and community. They ended up getting over 200 young people who were high at risk, either dealing drugs or in violent spaces, to come and help them paint instead of being at the streets, putting them to work through documenting and sharing this. And eventually, they had such a dramatic drop in crime and drugs in the town that correlated directly with this initiative. And it was partly their documenting and retelling of the story that caused it. Okay. So there's a host of stories that I want to share. And I wanted to share those because I think there's something important that we can understand here. I put this up at the end of yesterday as kind of a bridge to my talks. How we harness the potential of platforms and technologies to engage meaningfully in civic life dictates the collective value of our efforts. I tell you these stories because they all have one similar thing in common for me. They're not about large mass scale response. A lot of them don't necessarily necessitate people gathering physically. A lot of them take time and persistence and have scaled, and they actually use technology meaningfully and skillfully to embrace issues that matter to them, issues that they care about. And I think this is really important because it can shift. We often dichotomize technologies into useless or useful, into impactful or impactless, into engaging or distracting. And I want to complicate that a little bit and say, actually, there are so many more of these examples, what we call civic media, where people are actually using technologies, platforms, and designs for the common good. And this is something that we call civic media, and it's something that we are invested in. We just released a book with MIT Press last month, which is under the name Civic Media, Technology, Design, and Practice. And we actually define this use of technology for everyday civic engagement in the following way. The technologies, designs, and practices that produce and reproduce the sense of being in the world with others towards common good. So these are not just technologies, they're technologies, designs, and practices, and they produce and reproduce the sense of being in the world with others towards common good. So the other thing that all of those stories I told you necessitated, they necessitated communities. They weren't one-way dialogues. They weren't simply expression. They actually necessitated meaningful dependency with others who cared. You can't do the work of putting 90 YouTube videos online without other people supporting you or caring about you. You can't do the work of reforming and tackling the largest bank in the United States without a community support and be there for you. And so we thought a lot about this when we wrote this book, and we think about this of producing and reproducing the sense of being in the world with others. And I'll tell you what this means for us. And then I'll tell you some of the theories that went into this. Common good invokes actions taken that benefit the public outside of the actor's intimate sphere. So this is something that all of the stories I told you have in common. When we think about, and we mentioned this, most mentioned this, like about personal use of social technologies and social networks, and then public intentions. So we all use these technologies personally, and we do it all the time. As we said, we share what we had for breakfast. Every morning or every night, we go home, Moses and I go back to where we're staying, and we call our families and share things we're doing with them and our friends and our networks. That's okay. What we think of as civic media, in terms of common good, is that these technologies are used outside of the actor's intimate sphere, right? So it's outside of, it impacts the people beyond simply those friends you have on your social network, beyond simply that community that you have on Facebook or on Instagram, beyond your followers. The intention has to be to something larger. Whether it's safety or freedom of expression or food, whatever it is, it has to go beyond that intimate sphere. And then we say, civic media are any mediated practice, so this is where the media comes in, that enables a community to imagine themselves as being connected, right? So there's a case that it's striving for the common good, that we use these technologies to fix a problem that is bigger than our own and that impacts more than just us in our sphere, and that we envision ourselves as being connected, that we're not doing this alone. And what these technologies facilitate is a sense of meaningful dependency on each other to create aims that produce some kind of common good or some kind of common output. That we don't look at them as simply as reaffirmation. Yesterday in my talk I mentioned this idea of tethering and self-establishment, and that's a very critical view of what technology does. It's a very narcissistic view that we need to self-establish ourselves by continuing to show that we're there. So the more I show you that I'm interesting and that I'm neat, the better I am. But this says actually it's not just about self-establishment, but it's actually about being connected and being dependent on each other to share the value of our work. And so this is what we call civic media. And this is trying to reform this look at digital civic activism as simply needing to protest or fight, but more taking proactive steps at solving problems that we want for the common good. And this is happening everywhere. We put up over 100 case studies of this on Civic Media. I can send you guys the link, or I'll post it to that Facebook page after this. But we've documented now over 120 case studies where people are using technologies across the world to advocate for rights and ideas that they care about. Everything from learning and engagement to small-scale protests to representation to gender rights, equality, and they're actually using these technologies and taking them to scale. Okay, so what are the phenomena that are facilitating this growth? So before we get back to those stories and told you how they were, I'd love to take a couple minutes and look at the phenomena that are actually facilitating these. So here's the first one. These are just going to be some frameworks, and I hope they help. So there's been digital culture has changed civic culture. So when we think about citizenship and civic engagement writ large, in the Western model, like this is quite a Western model, or a democratic model, but I think there are some applications that we might all take away. Voting, paying taxes, joining the military or doing military service, and obeying the law. These are ways that we conceptualize good or informed citizenship because they were duties. It was duty-based. You weren't expected to advocate. You didn't have many avenues to participate beyond this, right? You could write a letter to the editor, I guess. You could go to a town forum. I think those things might not exist anymore. At least they don't really exist in Boston, where people actually gather once a month and talk about local community issues. If you go into them where I'm from, it's usually people that are retired and older, or it might be an issue that is large scale that affects your children that you show up for. But now we think about what digital culture has done to this is people don't identify with citizenship simply through these avenues. They identify through this, through independence, assertion, expression, the act of protest, and the act of participation. That voting is seen not as the be-all, end-all anymore. That citizenship in digital culture is as much about engaging with what we care about as it is with the duties we have to be part of civic life. Everything okay? Yeah? Okay, so this is the first framework that I think matters. The second thing, and I stole this from, Henry's not here today, but I stole this from him. Since we're in a mood, we're talking about things that we steal. This is from his book, Convergence Culture. And he talked about this, he found this work on the internet about him, and then I just took it from him and the internet. And the notion that this is also what's changing in our culture today, is that we actually participate. Participation is, because of these technologies, they've opened up ways for us to participate that are not so cumbersome or onerous. We don't always need to get out and go to the streets. And participation is now on a spectrum. It's not, did you go there or did you not? There's various touch points, there's various entryways that we can think about how we participate in the world. And participatory culture has emerged with relatively low barriers for engagement, strong support for sharing, informal mentorship. The community, again, mentors you. There's no teacher like me who's standing up here looking down at people. Like there isn't mentorship in government or engagement. It's more of a diffuse community. Members believe that their contributions matter. You can see reinforcement by people watching you or commenting you and giving you feedback, and that you care about others' opinions of yourself and your work. So participatory culture, and that whole book, Convergence Culture, talks about this. How we think about participation has completely changed. Interested bystanders, why people engage in civic life. So this is a study that was done actually at Columbia University and in cooperation with Google, so it might be completely biased, but the researcher was pretty good. And they found out, they did one on why people engage in civic life, and they did it over the internet. And the report is called Interested Bystanders, and you can find it online. It's free to download. It's full of really interesting data. And they said, why do people engage in civic life? And they found 3 things. The first is personal investment. Makes sense. The second is emotional fulfillment. And the third is clear interest to lose at stake. So anytime we choose to engage civically, these things are actually what drives us. And in those stories I told you, most civic issues scale on a personal level up. So most of them start with the notion of, you know, if I'm an activist and a civic artist and I see all these invisible people, I care and I'm going to scale this. It's emotional fulfillment. It actually makes me feel good. When anyone, I don't know if you guys have done this here, I know Jad and some of his colleagues were out in the protests against the government with the trash problem last year. We actually get fulfillment there. It actually makes us feel good to participate. It fulfills us emotionally. And then we have clear interests to lose at stake. Sometimes those interests are bigger, like governments, but other times those interests are smaller. Like I don't want my daughter to lose her after-school privileges because there's no money. Or I don't want to become unhealthy and overweight because I have no better alternatives for things to eat at school. Another frame for this, weak ties versus strong tie engagement. So we've all heard about this notion of weak and strong ties online. This has kind of extended the ability for us to have impact. So there's a famous sociologist, Mark Granovetter, who wrote about this a while ago, and he said, weak social ties are responsible for the majority of the embeddedness and structure of social networks in society, as well as the transmission of information through these networks. So you guys have probably heard the word Slacktivism before. I don't know if that rings to you. It's this notion that online activism is really kind of a less useful form of action, so we call it Slacktivism. And his argument, and he wrote this paper in the 1970s, and it actually reinforced that without these weak tie networks or these slacktivist forms of engagement, information would never be able to spread in scope and breadth that it has. So we need to rely on the strength of weak ties, because that actually matters. You've all been in this situation probably where you see an active protest or you see something happening online and you will share it or you will like it or you'll repurpose it for your community. Whether you know a lot about it or not is not as important as that you are sharing it with your network. In 2012 there was this big campaign called Colonia. I don't know if anyone remembers this, the Colonia campaign, you remember it? And it was about this Ugandan, he was a Ugandan kind of warlord who had a child army, and there was a push made by this nonprofit to get rid of him and to raise money. And they made a 27-minute video. It was part PR, part advocacy, part marketing, part journalism, but it was the most shared video. In 1 week, it was shared more time than any other video, and it was 27 minutes long. And it was the most shared video ever until Gangnam Style by that artist took it over. Which shows you how internet culture goes from serious to non-serious quite quickly. Sai, thank you for reminding me of his name. We can all watch that after this. But that video was shared. The people who watched that video watched an average of 4 minutes out of 27. It was shared more than any other video, more than any other playful video of cats, more than any other song video, and it caused actual reform. It was shared hundreds of millions of times. The United States government donated resources, politically in their Congress to try to go into Uganda and find this warlord, all because of this one video and the shareability. Weak ties is the theory that guided this, that people didn't watch it all the time, but they felt so compelled to share it that they shared it with their networks, and it ended up having this spreadable phenomenon, which to me, this reinforces the value of weak ties and slacktivism, not as like good or bad, but as something that actually matters in the context of engagement. And here's another way that we look at this. This is thick versus thin engagement. So this was developed at MIT's Center for Civic Media, and this actually helps us understand the way we engage, not as physical versus non-physical, but more as like, let's look at our engagement on a continuum, where we can engage in all types of ways in this world with things that we care about. And we can do it on this spectrum. It's an axis that shows us sometimes our engagement might be expressive and thick, or sometimes it might be thin and instrumental. But we should not look at this as yes, you did, or no, you didn't. But we should look at this as it's textured, it's contextual, it matters, right? So thin to thick engagement on the north-south axis. Thin engagement is characterized by little thought and creativity on the part of the public. So this could be that simply liking or retweeting, while thicker engagement is rich in thought and creativity. Right? So thicker engagement might mean you have to paint a caroka, or you need to actually write the letter and send it out. Thin engagement could mean that you're simply going to push the like button, or you're going to retweet something. Expressive to instrumental, digital media allows people to speak up about the problem, and that's expressive. So just simply expressive. And then instrumental outcomes are things that might include reform in laws, change in policies, something like school lunches being reformed, things like that. So we shouldn't think about civic engagement as a yes or no, or did you not, which is what the duty-based model. Let's think about it in terms of thin versus thick and expressive versus instrumental, right? And lastly, there's a great book called Twilights of the Elites, where Christopher Hayes argues that we are in a post-democracy state, at least in the United States, but many of these things can scale to the world. And he differentiates ideas of resistance versus revolution, oppression versus advocacy, and leaders versus the leaderless. And he said action moves from thin to thick and expressive to instrumental in the context of how we understand it as a revolution versus resistance, as oppression versus advocacy. And there's a lot of helpful hints in there. Okay, so I'm going to show a quick video, and I want to say, we're going to start to see these cases unveiled, and I want to show some videos to support them. But first we say, media that facilitate civic action are not just objects or texts. They represent communities of practice. This is from a seminal study by Leib and Wenger. They said these communities of practice implies participation in an activity system about which participants share understanding concerning what they are doing and what that means in their lives and for their communities. So let's rethink this civic activism not as the need to be physically somewhere, but the idea is that we are engaged in communities of practice. They're codependent, they rely on each other, and they actually use media where necessary to amplify and to de-amplify. And they say that in this communities of practice, it does become about the common good, and it becomes about dialogue and about engagement and about peer reinforcement. So here's two examples. These, Occupy Wall Street was global, and Black Lives Matter. They both still exist in some context. I'm going to show you a short clip about from Occupy Wall Street, and it's going to show the symbiosis between the online and the offline type of response, and how the movement oscillated online and offline. There's a couple issues, a couple points in the film where things are in the coverage. It's a Guardian story where they show people being hit. So, but there's nothing too graphic there, and it will actually just. We can take away from it the way that technologies and media helping facilitate the flow of online to offline activism. So we'll watch this quickly.
Dear Americans, this July 4th, dream of insurrection against corporate rule. Occupy Wall Street. In mid-July, Counterculture magazine Adbusters follows its tweet with a call to action. Occupy Wall Street, September 17th. Bring tent. Anonymous throws its support behind Occupy, and the movement's momentum takes off via social media. Citizens travel from across the country to meet up with activists in New York as Mayor Michael Bloomberg prepares for a protest. 2,000 protesters descend on Lower Manhattan. The New York City Police Department blocks Wall Street, and the protesters move to Zuccotti Park, where a culture of consensus takes root. Protesters camp for the night, and then for the week. Little does anyone know, the occupation is just beginning. Protesters received scant media coverage during the first week, but a few cans of pepper spray, an army of citizen journalists, and close to 1,000 arrests are about to change everything.
We saw in the video you being sort of surrounded and just sprayed in the face.
Police test boundaries and pile hundreds into paddy wagons, and the world begins to watch.
Occupy Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street. Wall Street.
Wall Street.
Obviously, I've heard of it. I've seen it on television.
New Occupy camps form around the world. Everyone gets fed, and libraries flourish. People want to express themselves, says Bloomberg, and as long as they obey the laws, we allow them to. On October 15th, the so-called Day of Rage, impassioned citizens march in more than 80 cities around the world. Protests in Rome turn violent and dominate headlines everywhere. Back in New York, peaceful Citibank customers are arrested after closing their accounts.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
Journalist Caitlin Curran is fired for holding a sign. A pepper sprayer is disciplined, and 1%ers post messages of solidarity. Meanwhile, pressure mounts for city officials to control protests. Dressed in riot gear and armed with tear gas and rubber bullets, police raid Occupy Oakland before dawn on October 25th. Headlines blast news about Scott Olson, an Iraq war vet injured by police. His name trends across Twitter. Days later, Oakland protesters strike back with a general strike. Meanwhile, on the East Coast, allegations of sexual abuse in camps surface, prompting Zuccotti Park protesters to create a women-only tent. 10 days later, it's eviction day in New York City. Credentialed journalists are refused press privileges, severely limiting eviction coverage.
I'm filming. I have DCPD press passes. Relax.
Occupations in other cities around the world are evicted. On November 17th, mobilized by crushed camps and torn tents, protesters around the globe turn out for 2-month anniversary celebrations. More than 200 are arrested in New York, including journalists. Feels like Turkmenistan, not USA, tweets Nick Kristof, but not even he was prepared for what happened next. Not everyone, however, empathizes.
Go get a job right after you take a bath.
With temperatures dropping.
Okay, so I'll stop there. As we see, the video continues on to simply say that they kind of show the oscillation between the online technology and the offline protests. But this helps us think about that relationship meaningfully. So what has to happen to sustain ideas over time? Occupy Wall Street was sustained for years, and some might say it's actually still going. Its impact is still in question. But what matters is that when the physical protests and the physical assemblies are not there, technology needs to be there to kind of continue to facilitate and sustain this dialogue. So the question that I have for us, and I'll spend a little bit of time talking about some research we did on this, is how do young people understand the relationship between digital media and civic activism? Because I think at the core in those stories I told you, what's valuable is for us to think about the relationship between whether they're actually perceiving networks as potential spaces for activism that's meaningful and engaging, or whether they think that we need to be out there. So because their perception of this will actually dictate the use of the tools. So this is a study that we completed, which we called the Civic Actor Gap, and it was the data has just been finished, and we're still writing up the results. But we asked 2 questions. What are the main barriers for civic action for young people in digital culture, and in what ways can civic media facilitate young people's participation in the global public sphere? And I'm going to just bring a couple results to you. So we actually, we talked to about 150 people. We did long form interviews, and as you can see, they were from around the world. The sample is quite diverse. We found out things like most of them primarily use social media for their news and information, and mobile phones by far was the space that they go most to. And I want to preface that by showing this kind of connected generation. So a couple things we found. They see social networks as increasing the diversity of information they receive. So this is their self-perception in interviews with about 150 or 200 young people around the world. They believe their own civic engagement is increased through social networks, but they're pessimistic about the role of social media in affecting change in their daily lives. So there was a bit of a disconnect that they equated. They saw themselves through social networks as more engaged and exposed to information, but they saw, at the same time, they saw social networks as by and large meaningless to have any active engagement beyond, like, yes, if we want to support protests en masse like Occupy Wall Street, then these tools are great because they connect people. I see more things, but in terms of me engaging with causes that I care about, that was far less, they were far less optimistic about that. And so here's some of the things why they didn't see social networks as valuable for their own level of civic activism, right? They said that apathy narratives about peers. So they thought that if they were posting things online, like issues around food or freedom of expression or gender equality or women's rights, that their peers wouldn't care, that they would be bothering them, that these things were not good, that if they made YouTube videos and shared them, that people would be annoyed and they would not respond. They all said that they didn't know how to go from being aware about these issues to taking action. They actually didn't have they didn't know what to do. So I'm really aware that as a black female in inner city Boston, where we talked to a bunch of the participants I struggle with my rights and with my representation. I see this happening all the time. I don't know what to do. And my social networks are not going to get me there. They were self-conscious about their own knowledge and beliefs. So I might see this issue, but I don't know if I know enough. And I feel like if I engage, someone's going to say something to me, and I will not have the knowledge to back it up. And then they said they had public discomfort with online expression. This again goes to the self-consciousness thing. That they said they're self-conscious about their own knowledge, and putting it in public means that they are almost like they have to confront their knowledge with a group that they're not concerned about. It's kind of the same thing as being a teacher. You say a lot of things and half of them might not mean anything, but you keep saying them. Online, they were echoing that. Like, someone's gonna call me out if I don't know things, and I'm scared of that, so I don't wanna start acting. And then lastly, there's this cynicism across all of it. What can we really do? What can I really do to change anything? Because it doesn't matter. Like, the school lunches are not going to change, or I'm not going to get the trash off the streets because everything is broken. And if it's that large of a problem, there's no way that I can use technology or become a meaningful actor in any way, right? So I want to spend the last 10 minutes of this talk talking about revisiting those stories and thinking about the way that we can decrease this civic actor gap. We heard those stories, we see some of the ways that technology is changing civic culture, but that technologies will only change civic culture in as far as people want to change civic culture. And I don't think everyone can be an activist like they are, but I think the more that we can help people think about their own sense of voice, agency, and power in support of civic action, not civic action meaning they have to go and throw things at governments or be in the streets protesting and yelling against armed security, but that they can do this in a way of kind of advocating for things that they want every day. For this, I use Pablo Freire, and his notion of critical consciousness is a frame for this in my work. He's a famous Brazilian educator and academic, and he talked about critical consciousness as the way individuals develop the ability to perceive their social reality, not as a closed world from which there is no exit, but as a limiting situation which they can transform, right? So how do you transform people thinking about their own social reality, not as like, I live there and this thing is happening and I can't do anything to change it, into, these are all limiting situations, but we can transform them. And if that's the way we approach this technology and civic activism, then I think we can embrace some of his writings and readings in that sense. And I also think we have the tools and technologies to do it, the resources, right? And this is where I'm going to come back to those stories under this concept of persistence. Persistence is something that Moses and I are debating on who stole from who, but yeah, right? Yeah, you got it. Okay. So, but we'll figure that out later. But so here's this thing that I think about as, this is the resources, right? So we now have the resources, human, technological, and practical, that citizens employ when engaging in actions for positive civic impact in daily life. And what I've noticed is these resources are all in the context of persisting. So resources could be practical, campaigns, advocacy, and communities, human, voice, agency, expression, and power, and technical, tools, platforms, practices, and designs. So we have these spaces. So the question is now, how do we use these, employ these, how do we build these together to create more everyday digital activism? So let's go back to our stories, and I'll try to impart some knowledge about this. If we revisit some of the stories that I showed you today, this is Martha Payne. Here's what she did, and this is where I talk about persistence. She had hundreds of blog posts and hundreds of pictures before anybody noticed. This notion of persistence. She didn't stop after 50. She didn't take 10 and then said, screw it. I'm never going to change my school lunches. She did hundreds of blog posts. The local Scottish Council shut down her blog, which was an amazing, which actually made her campaign successful. Once they noticed her, because she didn't stop, she didn't take 10 and stop, and they thought she was annoying, she took hundreds. Once she did that, Jamie Oliver, do you guys know, I think Jamie Oliver, he's a naked chef, is that right? Okay, as long as you know, then we're okay. He called himself the Naked Chef, and he's from British, he's very popular. He then, after he heard that the local Scottish government shut her down, he retweeted her, and this is kind of a big carrier of this. She grew to over 2 million followers and had 10 million hits on her blog, and she raised, like I said, millions of dollars for a Malawi Healthy News Initiative. This is persistent. She had the practical, technological, and human resources employed, right, towards that happening. And then here's just some more stats, but I'll go over this. Molly Catchpole, when she first launched her letter, she didn't just write a little letter and put it on. She had written about this problem over numerous social network initiatives for weeks. She had created petitions against more than just Visa, so she had refined the way she was creating petitions, and every petition that she was putting out there, more people started following her on change.org. So she built capacity. She wrote and shared letters across her network, so she used change.org and then created an integrated campaign that went all over the place, and she was really savvy by the mainstream media. And in the end of the day, this was her letter. But it wasn't just, this wasn't just a single document that she put out there. This was the letter, and the letter got remixed and reappropriated across all these different networks, and it ended up getting her that 500,000 people she needed to be picked up by mainstream media, because it wasn't seen as just, here's a letter, I'm going to put it out. She knew how to go from awareness to action very artfully, right? Here is Marshall Reed. We revisit him. He's the boy from North Carolina. He looks pretty happy here. He recorded and edited his own YouTube videos. He uploaded over 140 YouTube videos. That's amazing. Before he got picked up. This notion of human, technological, and practical resources. He didn't just upload 5 videos. He kept uploading them. He didn't stop. He had this persistence, right? He engaged with others via social networks. So many other people that felt in his shoes now had an avenue, someone to speak to. A lot of people suffer from this issue in the United States. He got picked up by media. He wrote a book contract, and he went to the White House and met Michelle Obama, which is pretty cool. And here's his video. I'll just show you quickly one of his videos. This is where I talk about human storytelling. It's not about a clean, polished, articulate video. It has to look good. It's about his story. So this is 30 seconds. And we can watch this quickly, but you'll see just how low the video quality is. He's just talking about what he's trying to make for food to raise awareness.
This is another video for Portion Size Me. I'm Marshall again, and we are making shepherd's pie for dinner. And as you can see, there's a bunch of cheese in this. You know, it's low fat, 50% reduced fat cheese. The meats we used in there are lean ground beef and ground turkey. And turkey is a lot leaner than normal beef. And we put the potatoes on here, which are usually high carb. We put light sour cream in them and fat-free half and half. No butter. I mean, come on, that has to be healthy.
Right, so this is great. It's 40 seconds, it's bad. I don't even know if the ingredients are healthy or not. I couldn't really get that. But what I take away from this is he's opening up dialogue with a community of other people struggling, and he's doing it on his own. It's a shaky camera. I think his sister, his dad is just holding it like this. He's posting it online, and he's giving voice to a lot of people who struggle with this. And there's something beautiful about that. And it's not something that is, you should do this, we should be that way. Here's some group that's telling you how to eat better. It's very organic. And his videos, this is the one that's been viewed the most from what I can tell from his own postings, and it was only viewed 7,000 times. I mean, only is relative, but for someone who gets to meet the president and gets a book contract and has millions of followers, it seems like he might have more. But the point was about the persistence of them over time and how that opened up the narrative, which to me is super powerful. This is what the I forget the word, Moses, again, but oh, thank you. Colonia. See, other people were listening. That's good. Disaffected youth became artists. Documentaries and blogs were written about the process and reduced crime and drugs in town. So you can see where this is in contrast to all the other gray buildings. It's really amazing. They picked this one community, and they picked this one community, and they show you just the power of how it works. And I'll play this quickly. I'll read the subtitles here just for you guys up there because it's just music with subtitles. So in case it needs to be translated, we can play it. But this is the story of this. It says, artistry recently transformed Mexico's Las Palmitas neighborhood into a giant mural. So you can see what it looks like. This is the collective work with residents to paint 200 homes, more than 200 homes. And it's promote community engagement and reduce crime. An artist also added 16,000 square feet of murals on the streets. The crime rate has dropped 35% since this project launched in 2012. And the project has spurred plans to paint other neighborhoods. So you see, this project to me it's another beautiful project, and it's also one that that they are telling the story both through physical art and then transforming that through the use of documentaries and colorful ways to recreate that in the public space. So this again is another way that we see this. And then the Pimp My Caroka project, this one is a case study that I feature a lot in my work because I think this is one of the best examples of civic persistence gone to scale. He painted Carokas for over 5 years, over 200 of them. This is persistence, right? This is the notion of persistence, an issue that he cared about, the invisible catadores. He developed relationships with them, overpainting them, so he started to know them and build dialogue. They didn't feel invisible to him, and that allowed him to tell their stories more meaningfully. He built an integrated media campaign that included social networks, but also what's phenomenal is that citizens started to take pictures of these beautifully painted carokas, and they started sharing them. So all he had to do was aggregate them. That actually became the largest crowd-funded campaign in Brazil, and he got all this money to support them, give them rights, raise their wages and their salaries. So I won't show this video. I don't think we have time. But I will say about these stories. So what matters here, right? A couple of things that I want to impart on us before we end. Civic action necessitates a media savvy that all groups need to operate effectively and inclusively. So the media savvy, first it has to be in our Civic Actor Gap study that I talked about. It has to connect awareness to action. There has to be some way that people start to realize the potential of social networks. To be more than simply personal outlets or things where weak tie engagement is the end goal. There needs to be more scaffolding in how we go from awareness to action. And then also, this means having skills and dispositions to be effective and engaged participants in daily life, whether in the face of large-scale oppression, like we saw with some of the early examples or Occupy Wall Street, or in the context of everyday community needs. It means we should stop differentiating these. Citizens have always been really great in where possible in protesting against large-scale oppression. And the technologies have helped facilitate and organize that. And I think there's a lot of work being done there. What's less clear, and I often think more important, is the way that citizens are using technologies in everyday life to build the competencies that scale from awareness to activism, right? So I'm much more interested in us, in this quote from Henry Jenkins that this is what we anchored our Salzburg project on, and he wrote, "We cannot change the world unless we imagine what a better world might look like." So now, like, if you think about Henry's talk on imagination, then you think about this talk on like the tools, technologies, practices, and designs that allow for us to see that imagination come to life. That takes persistence, and it takes these resources, human, technological, and practical. We can shift thinking about civic action from large scale to daily scale, and we can start to see the trade-offs and the things that we need to negotiate when engaging with these actions. And so I do think the last thing I want to say on this is, my comments here today, again, I think there are a lot of constraints to this thinking. There are a lot of things like time and safety that get in the way of us being advocates for certain things. Whether it's physical safety, or whether it's safety in your own networks, or whether it's thinking more about the resources needed to effectively engage in this concept of persistence over time with our networks. But they are interesting. They're interesting ways that we can reimagine or reconceptualize how these technologies might create a more active communities, from really local communities to large societies. So I will leave it there, and there's a couple minutes for questions, but thank you for listening. We have one here and one there.
I need to clarify a point from you before I start my question.
Okay.
It's about weak ties. You said that weak ties is the spread of media with a little relationship found. Is that right?
Yeah, weak tie is the use of social networks to share information beyond simply someone's personal knowledge.
Okay. What about copyright in that term? What about the spread of false information? Like I can find something and spread it even with a very little relationship found with my issue, or not to pay attention with copyrights and intellectual property.
So I can answer those quickly. So there are two different questions. So one is, so weak ties doesn't, so the weak tie concept is, in terms of copyright, that's a different question than people sharing information. So copyright, I think that necessitates a different answer, but people sharing information in and of itself is not always copyright infringement. If they falsify or if they repurpose, that to me is a larger endemic problem, but that goes back to yesterday's talk about media literacy and the need to educate people on how to critique and analyze.
In the Middle East, it's totally different.
Right, of course.
Very little pay attention
Sure.
in the Middle East, but people
Yep.
are very free to spread information and taking credit for it.
Right. So I can say it back. So I was saying in the Middle East, it's the copyright laws are less, so people are more free to spread information and take credit for it. I actually think that happens all the time, all over the world. In the United States, that happens very much. This gets to your question on falsifying information. That, like if we saw in the coup that was attempted in Turkey, we were in Salzburg following that. and some of our students from the region, where there was so much misinformation and people sharing things that were untrue with the Boston Marathon bombings. So I think that is a necessary byproduct of having an open information system where people are sharing and repurposing in real time. So there needs to be, there needs to be more critical literacy skills on how to verify and critique information as it comes to you, but also as like a consumer and a participant in this. When we receive that and when we see information kind of flying around, it's important that we also are able to assess and evaluate that. So when we repurpose and share it, we do so meaningfully and with little regard for false information. The last point I'll make on that is that I think this is something that I've been struggling with my life. If we rely on just the mass media to tell the stories, then we think that there might be less falsification and rumors. And I actually don't think that's true. I think if you rely on 2 or 3 newspapers to tell you stories, they're going to frame that any way they want. And because we trust them without questioning, then we take that as fact. So I actually, in my research on this, I actually think the question of credibility is not something that that is lessened in the social spaces. It's just more texture. There's more diversity of information. The user has to be more savvy. And in the mass media age, the same goes for it. There could be just as much manipulation. And in the past, there has, and it's been easier to cover up. So, yeah, but thank you. It's a good question. Oh, hi.
Hi. Thank you a lot for your lecture. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
And for your time. I wanted to say that when the part where you talked about the things that stop people from actually becoming social activists, and you mentioned about being self-conscious about their own knowledge, and this is something that really resonates with me because there's a lot of social issues that I'm like really passionate about advocating for, but I don't really have enough background knowledge to be confident when I talk about them, but you know, there isn't a lot of ways to become that, because you know, life is very hectic and you have all the things that you need to do, so you don't have a lot of time to go that extra step to learn the skills needed and the information needed. But also there's not many people who are advocating for those social issues, so you need to do something, and it's kind of an internal conflict, and I'm not really sure how you can put that aside and still do social civic actions using digital media, because also what she mentioned about falsifying information, and you don't want to be part of the people who falsify that information. So it's just a very big internal conflict. Right. So I don't know what you could talk about that.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that is, in that research, that's what we found. You know, one of the large findings was that and that's difficult, right? So there's a couple things you said that really resonate with me personally, and I think part of me struggles with this myself too. So, and I can share a story that might help think about this, but it's not that I think we all negotiate that. It's not that because I research on this and I engage in activism locally where I am in certain ways, in different contexts that I'm good at it or I'm more knowledgeable. So I think one is what Jad is building here is really important. Like how we build the technical skills to create these stories and to tell them artfully, as we saw with the 12-year-old from North Carolina, it doesn't take a heavy production skills. It just really takes the attention to how we can create stories and share them through these platforms that make a lot of sense. So the one thing is there's very practical resources that we can use. And Jad's building capacity in the region and a support system of people who you should be able to rely on here to help you tell and make those stories. That's why this is so super important and why Moses and I have been coming for 5 years. We love your food, we love to swim in the sea. Jad treats us very well, but I think we're here because this type of capacity is really important. And then the knowledge thing, you know, all the stories that I shared, I don't necessarily think anyone owned that knowledge. It wasn't, you know, it's not about you needing to know everything. It's about you needing to have a view and feeling confident in how you present that and feeling confident that you can, you almost have to open yourself up, right? It's like in any story. There'll be people who have great dialogue with you, and then there are going to be people who will call you out and challenge you, and that's okay. Like, that's almost a confidence thing, right? And that's, to me, that knowledge in that sense, knowledge is power in the sense that it's about being articulate and being able to tell your story, not in a way that you've told everything, but that you're going to try to convey meaning. And so I think that's really important, right? Like, I've done, they might know, so like I was involved in a local campaign against a school district who was firing teachers because they had hid financial costs in a community that my mother had worked in, and she was one of the people that was fired in her last year of service. And I was there in the newspapers, on TV, and at these meetings. And you know, I was passionate about education and what you needed to do. And we started a whole campaign. We built a group. We had people sharing videos. We had them on Instagram talking about their teachers. I wasn't knowledgeable about every system in this, but I engaged in the cause I believed in. And you face pushback, and that's okay. You know, I think there's things like safety and time that we all have to consider. But I think it's about, again, like yesterday I talked about voice and agency and power. And that is something that really matters for when we think about how to overcome some of the limitations that we might have.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Can I just say one comment?
Yeah.
Those, like the things you mentioned, they're very good when you're addressing social topics that the majority of the people agree with. But if you go the further step and you try to break social constructs and you, a lot of people take it as an attack.
Right.
So instead of like calling you out on ways you could improve or calling you out on maybe misinformation you said, they would come at you as a kind of attack.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have to be very defensive, and you're gonna have. That's why I focus a lot on the having background knowledge. It's not because I want to know everything, to tell people everything, but to be able to defend my points of views when I actually get like attacked by people, not physically, but you know.
Yeah, no, of course, and I think that's right. So I think, you know, part of that is knowledge, part of that is voice and dialogue and engagement. So, and the more passionate you are about something, I imagine the more you'll start to know about it, and that can happen organically. But a big non-starter for the people in our study was that they felt that they needed to know everything before they could engage because they were worried. And in fact, you know, much like we do in teaching, we kind of build and respond as we go. You add knowledge. You don't need to know everything before you start a course or before you start an issue, and you add to it. And that's okay to see it as an arc. So
thank you so much for your
You're very
time.
welcome. Should we do one more question, Jad? Is that okay? Okay, 2 more questions? Okay.
شكرا لك على المحاضرة الغنية بالمعلومات. بدي ابدا من نقطة انت حضرتك حكيتها انه احيانا يستخدم مثلا بعض وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي لشغلات مثلا تعتبر عادية وتمرير اخبار شخصية وكذا. بدي احكيك عن تجربة مثلا في بلدنا سوريا. حاليا يعني اكثر استخدامات التواصل الاجتماعي اصبحت شخصية، ما بتعطي مثلا معلومة ولا شيء، وبسبب الوضع الازمة في سوريا انقسم المجتمع الشارع لقسمين، قسم مع قسم ضد. وفي احيانا اخبار ترويجيه بتتم لصالح هذا، وفي احيانا مثلا نستخدم اخبار ترويجيه لصالح الطرف الثاني. واحيانا ما بيستطيع الانسان يعبر عن رايه فيه بصراحه، بخاف من حادث يصير معه، اعتقال امني، حط شير لايك كذا. فصفى عندنا وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي عباره عن شخصيه اكثر وانتقامات. كل واحد بيشد على الطرف اللي معه هو. فنحن كيف بدنا نعيد ثقة الشباب لاستخدام هاي الوسائل للشيء الصح؟ كيف بدنا نخليهم يستخدموها بالطريقة الأمثل، الطريقة اللي هي هدفها هي نشر الوعي أكثر، يستخدموها لإعطاء معلومة صحيحة مو لشغلات شخصية. شو الآلية؟ ما بنعرف كيف نعيد الثقة. يعني مثلا فكرة اللي حكيتها مثلا هي تبع الطفلة اللي أثبتت إنه مثلا خلال وجبات الطعام، هي مثلا غير واردة بمجتمعنا، مثلا انه طفل يبادر بمجتمعه حدا يعطيه تأييد. وفي بعض المقاطع اكيد وصلتكم على امريكا لاطفال من سوريا استخدموا على اساس انه يمارس عليهم الارهاب والقمع و الى اخره، لكن هي كان في منها يعني مدبلجه وفي منها صحيحه. كيف بدنا نعيد الثقه بين المواطن والشارع خاصه الشباب؟ شكرا لك.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question. I mean, that's this is a very, the way that I think about this is it's so contextual. So these networks do not stand alone from current political and cultural and social situations, right? So when I was speaking about this, I was saying that, you know, that these are general entryways in, but that they do depend on. So if we think about safety, for example, as one, the current situation, we had Syrian students in Salzburg with us who just returned back to Damascus, and some of them back here, and they had talked about the use of social networks and how dangerous it was to advocate public things that might be in line with one side or another. In Belarus, they had their revolution a few years ago. They shut the networks down and found everybody. In Turkey now, what's happening, we have colleagues, 2 professors in Turkey since the coup attempted have gone incommunicado, who were good colleagues of ours, and we had visited them and spoke with them, and they've been taken away and are away from their families. And the government said some of it was because of their affiliation with American academics. So because of their expression and engagement. So, you know, I don't know how you can, I don't think there's an answer to say, well, if we do this, then you can start engaging with social networks before we can fix other big situations. I would only say that, you know, if the personal ties keep people engaged in these social processes, and if personal engagement is valuable and it can lead to connections, then that can be maintained. And hopefully, if the situation is one where the country opens up, then we can start to implement these things more appropriately. If there are controls, like Moses spoke at the end of his talk about government controls. If there are government controls on this information, or there's government surveillance that doesn't allow us to openly express or engage using social networks, then we have to think about personal safety. We have to think about the implications of communication and expression in that context. So, yeah, I don't think there's an easy answer. I don't think you can disentangle this type of civic activism from situations in countries that are in conflict now. But, you know, I hope that there's a way that we can think about these tools as continuing to keep dialogue within groups and across groups, and keeping people connected even when governments are not allowing them to connect. So I wish I could give a more positive answer. Okay, one more question. That's okay. Jad, is that okay?
شكرا على المحاضرة. أنا لدي مداخلة صغيرة مو سؤال. أنا أرى يعني لدينا تجارب كثيرة في العراق باستخدام الموارد التكنولوجية أو الوسائل الإعلامية في الحراك المدني أو النشاط المدني، خاصة خلال حشد وتعبئة الجمهور للتظاهرات. ولدينا حراك مدني على مستوى عام، ولدينا على مستوى خاص لشركات أو مؤسسات ضد شركات أو مؤسسات. هنا أرى بأن استخدام الموارد التكنولوجية في الحراك المدني أو النشاط المدني الذي يكون ضد الحكومة وبين قوسين ضد سياسة الحكومة، دائما الاستجابة فيه تكون معدومة أو قليلة أو ربما تغيب القضية. بينما الحراك المدني اتجاه مؤسسة أو شركة خاصة ممكن أن تغير هاي الشركة أو المؤسسة سياستها، كما حدث للطفلة اللي عمرها 9 سنوات. عندنا تجربة إنه إحدى المطاعم في الجامعات العراقية كان سيء في تقديم الطعام. كان هناك حراك مدني لمجموعة من الطلاب، تم تغيير هذا المطعم وإدارة المطعم، لكن الحكومة نحن لا نرى أي استجابة للحراك المدني الموجود في العراق. فهل أنت تتفق معي في هذا أم لا؟ إنه الحراك المدني ضد الحكومات عديم الاستجابة. إذا ما الهدف من استخدام شبكات التواصل أو وسائل الإعلام؟ الرسالة ما وصلت، يعني هنا الرسالة ما وصلت إلى هدفها.
Thank you for that question. So it's it's a great question, and I think it's not only, so I think my comment would first start by saying public sphere, large governments, or even in the United States, the private sphere is as much as protected as the public sphere. So in the United States, for example, I've experimented, so the way that I can relate to this is I've tried to think about activism around the opioid epidemic, this idea of there's a lot of drug addiction problems. I've had that influence some people close to me in my personal life. And then when you try to kind of use social networks, you feel like it's hopeless because nothing changes. And I've run up against that, like that these don't change, they might shut you down, they respond in a very forceful way. Whereas like on the small scale, reforming civic organizations, restaurants, or my work against the school district that ended up being successful, they had to remove the administrators and bring back the people that they had fired. So I think there's ways to look at this as a scale, and I don't think that we should, I don't think we should look at effectiveness as success or not success, because sometimes it's very easy in my examples to show you that, one little girl reformed school lunches and people can reform restaurants to make them more accountable. But I think in the other sense, like when we're pushing against larger structures, we should think about activism over the context of time. So we think about these technologies, pushing against opioid crisis, you're not gonna solve that right now, but what you can do is nudge the conversation. You can expose it to your networks. That's the weak tie phenomenon. You can, if you're talking about government, as long as it's within the context of safety and you understand the trade-offs, that dialogue is useful. You're not going to reform government or policy overnight, but what you can do is continue to engage that dialogue, to share it, to advocate, in hopes that you are pushing something towards where we might want it to go. And so I think all of this, again, we should not think about this as a as kind of a goal of like, well, we can succeed here and not here. So I would say that there are political and governmental and public situations that make it difficult to engage in these, and that there are certain risks in local communities. But in the end of the day, these tools can facilitate dialogue that's meaningful, and that's what I would impart. So thank you again for this talk.